Thank you, Tew, for
Thank you.
being here, for sharing this time and space with me. I'm working with movement, but mostly I'm a curious seeker. So when I meet a teacher that embodies the teachings in such a way, it's inspiring for me to learn from his path. So this is why I invited you, and I'm honored that you accepted my invitation.
Well, I'm honored I was invited. As far as embodying the teaching and everything, I try. It's an ongoing process.
I'll start with the most difficult question for me. Who are you?
This is a question that I am still working on. So I can't answer you, and I don't think I will ever be able to answer this, even to myself, because the answer, I have come to know the answer, but it's not in words. I can't describe. I could describe to you. I am Thai. I was born in Thailand. I was brought up in England and partly in France, and I had my education. I could describe, all of that. But your question is a very deep one, and that's what I intuit. You want the deep one, and it was a process. I mean, it is a very important question, and I don't take it lightly. And I'm not trying to answer you lightly or evading your question. But my life has been a discovery, and it still is, of who I am. And it only started to become clear about 50 years ago. I'm 78 nearly, okay? So that's who I am as well. An old guy. But it started when I started teaching, which was 50 years ago this year. But I still didn't know. I mean, I still said, what am I doing? Who am I in all this? And it was only gradually in my career as a teacher a lay teacher of meditation and a teacher of Tai Chi and Qigong, that I gradually, if you like, assumed who I was, that I realized what I'm doing here, and particularly very recently, I kind of go back to my very early childhood and the early memory, because I have very, very early memories which have to do with kind of, I don't want to sound pretentious, but they are real memories, of coming back. That's the thing, and fulfilling something, doing something. And I'd actually forgotten about this for many years. And in recent years, by recent years I mean about the last 10, 15, I kind of sensed what I came back to do, right? And what I came back to do was to contribute to something, was to channel something in. See, I don't want to sound like that, there's any importance to this, but this is, when you ask who am I, this is the sense of who I am. Because when you say, who are you have to think, well, what are you doing here? I mean, do you have any sense of why you're here? And this is the sense that's come to me.
I mean, people ask all the time, who are you? And I find it hard to answer to that question.
Absolutely.
So I have to choose an answer for each person, maybe.
You probably do, but I think the answer that you have to be able to give is the answer to yourself. It's understanding yourself and kind of almost, and it's discovering something that was already there, but it's to be discovered. It's not to be invented. Like suddenly you say, well, I'm a Tai Chi teacher. Don't you see? You know, you've just done a course with me or something like that. It's not that. You know, these are the externals. You know, this is what describes what you do, and where you've lived, where you were born, and so on and so forth. You know, which are all sort of interesting in their way. It's not like that. But the deep question which you're getting at, I think this is our quest. This is our path, and it either suddenly reveals itself to you, or I think gradually. In my case, gradually, you know. And I now kind of know who I am, but I can't put it into words. But it has to do with what I do and the commitment, you know. So when I say with the process, I mean that before I really assumed who I am, I was always sort of struggling with it, you know, kind of almost resisting it, you know, almost sort of saying, well, yeah, I can do this, but I can do that, you know. I have this life, but I quite like to taste that, and so on. You know what I'm saying? That kind of fragmentation, you know? Not doubt or anything, but this sense of not being totally committed to being me.
When did it become clear?
Well, as I say, it's still clearing. I mean, I don't think you stop. I think you deepen. I think you deepen this sense of becoming yourself, you know, of realizing yourself and understanding your presence in this dimension at this time.
How did it start? I mean, as a child, you chose to do some things that led you here, or as a young person.
Well, yes, again, you see,
You could have chosen another sport, like playing football instead of doing martial arts.
Absolutely. I think there are many factors, again. You can't say one. I think for me, if you're talking about my spiritual life, the most important person was my nurse, my nanny, you know, who brought me up. She was a Buddhist and a practicing Buddhist. So she meditated, you know, and she had monks at the house. She got me in the morning to give, you know, put food in monks' bowls and things. Very Buddhist life when I was very young. And it set the base of my life, really, you know. And it wasn't just Buddhist in the kind of cold sense of, you know, vipassana practice and this and that, but it was a kind of Buddhism which exists in my country, which is open to spirit, you know, ghosts, and things like that, things that you can't explain. And well, this was my young life, and it also happened. Again, I don't use the word coincidence, you know. It was something which, when I look back, I say, well, that's what my influence was. It happened to be that when I was very young, too, I was initiated into boxing, you know, Thai boxing and Western boxing. And so that came very naturally as well. You know, I wanted to do that. So I had the two things which I'm now still doing, which is the spiritual part, the meditative part, and so on, and the martial side, you know, and these are combined in the Tai Chi, really, you know, and the Qigong.
Martial arts don't reveal the same things to everyone.
No.
So what is it for you?
Well, because the martial side, unfortunately, it's deteriorated. My opinion, okay? I'm not putting anyone down for wanting to do it in a certain way. You can do it in any way you like, but for me, the martial side is such a precious gift, you know, to have, because it teaches you so much, you know, about your fear, about your violence, about the way perhaps you transform fear and you stop being violent, and you learn to live with peace and things like that. I look at this as a martial arts, you know, not, I mean, obviously when I was young, I loved boxing, I loved, you know, all that stuff, and but even then, you know, it can teach you a lot. It can teach you how to lose, you know, without getting angry. You know, it teaches you how emotions, particularly negative ones, you know, just burn you up. So it teaches you how to center, stay centered, stay calm, and all that. So even the external martial arts have a lot to teach, but the internal ones, which I got to when I was in my late teens, are, I think, really precious gifts, for everyone.
So the practice is important.
The practice is important, and it has to have a spiritual side, which is what I was saying about deterioration. If you take all the spiritual training and just go for who wins, who loses, who's the toughest, and then give prizes, big money prizes to those people, you miss something so precious. You miss something really valuable. You're just in that win or lose situation again.
So any practice is important, or a specific practice is important?
Look, in the martial arts, in the traditional martial arts, right? In Kung Fu, for instance, this is the bow. So this is the, if you like, the practice of the skills, the talent, which are, some of them are not easy, not easy to maintain your center, not easy to yield, not easy to not get frightened. But this hand is terribly important. And this hand is the hand of passion, the heart. And so all your talents are led, are guided by the heart. So the practice is most important. As you practice a martial art, it's the practice of opening the heart, of cultivating the compassion in the heart. And that is what saves you from falling into the trap of doing harm and fighting and stuff, which is part of your training.
How do you understand that you are proceeding in the right way in the practice?
I don't know. You're full of difficult questions. I don't know. I think how you feel. I mean, if you're going around, you're talking about people who practice martial arts, right?
I'm talking about people practicing something that is a way to themselves.
Okay. Well, let me start by limiting it to martial arts. If you practice a martial arts and you go around the streets thinking that a potential fight everywhere, it's not a comfortable way to live. It's very uncomfortable. But you grow used to it. It's very stressful, full of output, full of anxiety. The world is a permanent enemy, and you're looking permanently, and you won't sleep well because of this, because you're always tense. So that is a standard, and you can recognize if you're honest enough and you say, wow, I'm doing martial arts, I'm really enjoying myself, but and I'm learning a lot of things, and I'm challenging myself, and I feel super fit. But when I'm outside, I can't relate to the world in a peaceful way. I'm relating to the world as a potential fight. Now, that gives you a clue as to what you need to do. You understand? Because it's not a way to live, unless you're in this kind of warlike state all the time. Not a pleasant way to live. It doesn't help other people. People may even be afraid of you or respect you for the wrong reasons, because you've got big, tough, muscly body and you know how to kick and how to hurt. Not a good way to earn respect. And very often when I see these people training in that way, I see that they're hiding the fear behind. The fear of losing, the fear of not being the strongest, the fear of being dominated and not being the dominator, So not a good way to live. Not a good way to live.
How important is the teacher?
The teacher is very important, right? But the teacher, I think there's a misunderstanding here because of this, in a cultural way, East and West, that the teacher somehow assumes some authority and some power over the student. And in the traditional thing, you're the master, if you like, in martial arts. And then your students follow you, copy you, try to be your clone, and then finally challenge you and so on. And there's a kind of point in all that too. But for me, I never thought of the teacher in those terms. I've never been pro-mastership, if you like, because, as I say very often in the courses I give, a master is trapped by being a master, because a master is meant to know everything, meant to sort it all out. He or she has the answer to everything. That's not true for a start, and it's not a very good way to live either, for the master, I mean. It limits you from staying awake and evolving and, changing and, you know what I'm saying?
So what makes a good teacher?
A good teacher is a student. He or she is still learning, is still curious, is still awake to evolving more, to deepening. You haven't got a recipe, right? The master has a recipe, see? And he has an image as well to keep up to, which is a terrible burden. I've seen it many times. And I've kind of, been put in that position enough times, to know that that's not what I want to be, when somebody says, oh, you like wine or something? And you go, please, give me a break, A master isn't supposed to drink wine or something. You know what I'm saying? So you get fixed. I always hated being fixed anyway, but also you fix yourself if you take yourself seriously as a master, rather than as a teacher. A teacher should be learning with, even a teacher of small children. A teacher of small children, the good teachers, the ones I've met, the ones I know, friends of mine who are teachers of small children, they're like small children. They're learning to not lose their enchantment, and this is the whole point. You don't get stuck in this role of the knower, you're always discovering. That's what makes a good teacher. You're discovering, and by discovering, you feel free to experiment. You feel free to include. You feel free. You're not stuck. But the moment you're stuck in it, the teacher as master. There's a lot of this in the spiritual world, not just in martial arts, in the spiritual world. Then you're stuck. You can hardly move out of this.
Who inspired you as a teacher?
Well, the first person.
Even if you haven't met him.
Even if I haven't met him. Well, I happen to have met, Oh, yeah. There are a couple I haven't met. Jane Goodall is one, the chimpanzee lady, the way she comes across and talks. Someone else I haven't met is David Attenborough, who does all the programs on the sea and the earth and the animals. Wonderful, wonderful, humane people who are both with animals, by the way. Who are both with animals. I'd never met Nelson Mandela, who I count as one of my heroes. But the others I did meet. I'll name 3 of them. I think possibly the most important one is this Scottish doctor who has died. She died at 98, still working. She was a therapist, she was a psychiatrist. And I met her when I was 29. She was 91. She wanted to learn Qigong and meditation from me. It was very humbling, I tell you. And she was famous at that time. She was already very famous. And I kind of trained with her in Jungian work. But it wasn't the Jungian work that inspired me. It was her being, the sense that at 91 she was still curious. She wanted to learn something, and she wanted to deepen her spiritual life, with a young guy who had no experience, or anything. It was beautiful for me. very, very inspired. And it was she who taught me the very simple thing which I try to transmit to people I teach, which is receive, hold, pass it on. This came from her, you know. And since meeting her, I met her in 1976, about 49 years ago. I've not just used this as a teaching, but I've worked with it, you know. Seems so simple. Receive, hold, pass it on. How to receive, you know, you've got to know how to receive. What are you receiving, right? And then holding and not keeping. Holding because it nurtures you, and then pass it on. A lot of people who receive and who suddenly like filled with it, you know, become then the gurus and things. They don't pass it on. They give it away in little drips and drabs, you know. No, pass it on. So she was very inspiring. The other person who inspired me, but who, you know, who got, for me, it was sad how he went so young, was my Tibetan teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, who's an incredibly inspired teacher, and who I go back to a lot, you know, his teachings. Unfortunately, there was a kind of contradiction between what he taught and how he lived, you know, in the end. But at the beginning, when he first came to England, when I was at university, he went to a university in England, and I studied with him and I practiced with him. I still go back to that basic teaching and a basic way of looking, particularly at the traps. He wrote a book called Spiritual Materialism, for example, you know, where he kind of highlighted the fact that, you know, even in the spiritual life, you could start wearing badges and things like that, you know, materializing it into something. And so he was a warning. Then my third important teacher was my teacher who died as well during COVID, who was called Viravansa, who was an abbot when I first met him, famous abbot. And then at the time when I was thinking of going to the monastery and becoming a monk, he was coming out. And he taught me one really wonderful thing, you know. He said, no, don't go in there and wear a uniform. I mean, do if you like, but, you know, he said, the spiritual life is to be lived in the ordinary life. It's the most challenging. You don't have a uniform to, you know, as a calling card. You don't have all these rules to save you. You know, you have to live in a challenged way. And it woke me up, you know, and it's been what I feel ever since. Which is not to reject the monastery and the monkhood or anything like that. Everybody has his own choice, you know. But for me, I definitely go along with this teaching that the spiritual life is challenged by everyday life, you know, and it's a good challenge.
The way you live your practice has changed in the years. From your students, I've heard that the intensity of the practice has changed.
Definitely.
Is it because your energy has changed, so you adapt it, or because you have gone so deeper in the practice that you realize that other things are more important? If you had the same energy today, you would do the same thing today?
Yeah, I can't. It's hypothetical, you know. If I had the same energy, I don't have the same energy. That's the point. I'm not a young man, you know. And what I've tried to be was consistent with myself, authentic to myself. Not just thinking, what do people need, you know. So the people who've been with me have kind of grown old with me too. So let's say when I first started teaching in Greece, it was about 1987, or 85 was the first time actually. But, I was sort of young and fiery and everything, and I still enjoyed fighting as play, so I did a lot of that kind of work. Strong, very strong, fiery stuff. And the people I was teaching were young and fit and enjoyed that and also needed it to discover that stuff, And then, my practice has evolved with who I am, with my energy, that's one factor. But it's also evolved with the world, with what's going on in the world, If I was now, even if I had the energy now, I wouldn't do the fighting part, because there's such an urgency to me in the world of what's needed, And that's come with age as well. It's come reflecting what I am, but I can't deny what's going on in the world. And it's very different from 1980s or 1990s. It's very, very different. There was a kind of a very different energy, very different world going. It's a very frantic time, very hurtful time we're living in, anxious time, full of anxiety, depression, division, uncertainty, and all that, And, of course I'm affected by all that too. I have children, I have grandchildren. I know what's going on, from them. And my own practice has adapted to that too. Why? Because I have to work. And especially since I began working with dying people and accompanying and things like that, which was about 20-something years ago, I come across a lot of anxiety, a lot of, grief, a lot of sadness and things. So I've adapted my practice to be able to cope with that situation. Not just to help other people cope, but to help myself cope with the emotions that are to do with that situation. So yes, my practice has changed. Yes, I've felt free to modify certain things. I'm not a purist in that way, like you have to keep on doing the same thing year in, year out. Some people choose to do that, and that's fine. But for me, you have to flow with what's going on in the world, And the practice, first of all, has to be authentic to where you are, but it's also got to be relevant to where the world is.
20 years ago you started working with death and accompanying people.
Well, no, I actually started working with death and dying when Dhiravamsa asked me to help him, in a centre. We had a centre in London, in England, near Cambridge. And obviously in a centre you will have people who come who are sick, people who come who've just lost somebody, people who come who are terminal and so on. So I was exposed to that very young. And the way Dhiravamsa, the way I was trained was very traditional. This is the kind of advice you give, this is the kind of practice you give to prepare. But it wasn't it was once a year, twice a year that I had to deal with a situation like that. And then in the year 2000, when I was in my own country looking after my mother, who had Alzheimer's, this is the year after my first wife had died, and my very beloved niece had committed suicide. I was very close to all this. And I decided to do some voluntary work in my country in a center which I knew about in the slums. And again, no coincidence, absolutely no coincidence. I was there just to look after the children. I thought, help a bit, clean up, But nobody had told me that this center had been converted, part of this center, been converted into a hospice, a place where the poor went to die from AIDS, men and women, young men and women, and a few of them were sex workers and things, and then the children, loads of children. So it was my real exposure. It was quite a shock as well. So it was there my apprenticeship from 2000 on for about 7 years straight. I was working there, and I learned. I learned so much, and I learned to drop the training that I've had. Not to drop, not to reject, but again to modify. So because the people we were accompanying were not necessarily Buddhists, they were Muslims, they were Christians, they were nothing much at all. And none of the children had a spiritual language, so you couldn't talk Buddhism to the children. It didn't mean anything to them. You had to approach the whole thing from a secular or an open, way. And so I learned what I now teach and transmit through the children, really. And it's still Tai Chi. So people would say to me, "Oh, you teach Tai Chi and then you work in the field of death and dying." And I said, no. I do the Tai Chi in the field of death and dying.
What does it mean to you?
Well, again, this is where languages are. I love languages, and this is where language can be so rich. Accompany, when you use the word acompañar, in Spain, where I live, where I do most of my work, you are there on with bun, bread. So you're breaking bread with somebody. You're not advising them, you're not guiding them, you're not directing them, you're not interrupting them. You are by their side. That sounds simple. It's not that simple. You're by their side with your own humanity. That's with bread. You're sharing the bread with somebody, that's accompanying. So it's not curing, it's not caring for, it's being with, accompanying, being your side by side with your own humanity, your own frailty, your own fears, your own wounds, your own reality, And that is a challenge, because until you can be with yourself and respecting what has happened in you, and particularly the hurt that you hold or the wounds that you hold, you can't be accompanying other people. You can care for them, you can have a role caring for them, but you can't. You're there for them, but you can't be there with them. Really, close people dying, close people dying. First of all, my first wife, I was with her for 7 years, in her dying. The shock of losing my niece. Then my mother, another 7 years. She had Alzheimer's. These were, for me, teachings, teachings about grief, about remorse, about letting go, about gratitude, all these things. But again, I go back to my time with the children. The children were the people who taught me what really mattered and worked as well, not as a formula, but for example, your words, even if they're sincere, or your advice, even if they come from a good place, not what they needed. What they needed was your compassionate presence. That was compassionate. Much better than words, much better than philosophy. So I learned that from them. And much else.
Now the course we did now was about aging. About aging.
Aging, yes. It now that I look back, because I've been doing these courses now for about a year and a half. This is the 5th one in a year and a half. It's quite a lot, to do. And they're becoming clearer and clearer, how to approach it. But I think it was inevitable, you see, working, working in the field of death and dying, inevitably it was going to take me into the field of aging. You can't have one without the other kind of thing. Well, yes, you can. There are dying, sudden deaths, and, death of young people and all that. But in general, aging and dying come together. And then the other thing is, of course, it's relevant to me. At my age, I already am kind of falling apart gently. I have things going wrong, like many people my age. And I'm already preparing. The horizon is there, just like those mountains. They're there already, and the horizon is coming towards me. So it's very relevant to me, right? How am I living this phase of my journey?
How should we live it?
Joyfully, gratefully, creatively, People my age often think of themselves as useless. They're useless because they're not part of the economic machine anymore. They're not in the factory anymore, if you like. But so much to do, This is what I was trying to get across in this course. Even if you just sat there and you could channel loving kindness into the world and trust that energy that you're channeling in without having to, obsess with it and make an incredible effort. You just sit there and channel it and connect with all the people who are suffering.
We're not taught how to do that.
Exactly.
We don't think about it even as a possibility.
Absolutely. You don't trust that because you don't trust what you can't see, because we're all brainwashed into thinking of reality only as tangible, visible, replicable in a laboratory. It's a very sad, limited way. Fortunately, science itself, quantum science, is breaking that down. It's telling us, no, that's only one reality. There's only one dimension. There are other dimensions going on, energetic dimensions, vibrational dimensions, which we may not be able to see or, possess.
Fear.
Fear, yeah, the big one. The big one. And the big one, not just for old people, young people. Going back to martial arts, a lot of people do martial arts because of fear, because they're afraid. They're afraid of being the victim, being hurt. So, they learn how to defend themselves. I say good, but only if you're dealing with the fear at the same time. So it's not good if you just train to be so tough, like a skin or like a shield, so that you don't feel anything or you feel invincible. And meanwhile, the little boy or the little girl is just trembling inside, Fear of failing, fear of connecting to somebody, fear of being looked at, fear of being seen, fear of revealing your fear, right? There's so much to fear. The Buddhists look at it as the root of all the crazy things that we do and the way that we live our lives individually, in relationship, socially. If we can just confront the fearful aspects of that and explore the possibilities of transforming that fear, then your life is really very different.
What can we do?
What can we
About
do?
all the fear that causes all the conflict, the wars, the division. What can we do?
I think the first thing is to allow it to come up. Most of the effort, even in spiritual practice, I think, is to either bypass it, or to suppress it. But there's another option. The option is allow it to be there and recognize, and this is where the martial arts can help. Rather than trying to find the source of the fear, recognize where is it? When you're afraid, where is it? So let's say somebody is working with anxiety, which is fear. It's just got a nice name to it. Anxiety. Anxiety is fear. So where is it? Here. What does it make you do? Oh, it churns my stomach. Or here. What does it make you do? Or my heart starts going like this. Or here. It makes me choke. It blocks me. So then you work through the body. I think this is the whole point, and this is where, again, perhaps Eastern approaches, which is always inclusive of the body, it should be, rather than the Western approach, which is work it out here first. Where does it come from? What's the root? It's useful. It's not that I'm against that, but if you could mix the two, and my preference, because of my training, through the body, recognize, if it's here, then direct your breathing here. Direct your energy here. If it's here, put your hands here. Tenderly massage yourself, and so on. I'm just giving vague examples, but through the base, which is through the body, because it's in the body that you feel here. I'm frightened. What's happening? So then you come into themes like the fascia, the connective tissue. They register fear. And if you can work on that level of breathing, and this is where the Qigong exercises, the exercise of mudras, which I was showing, they're tools. They won't fix it, but they're tools in which we engage with our fear instead of suppressing it or trying to bypass it.
The way to help is to face our own fear.
But you also have to learn how to face the fear of others, because the fear of others is very contagious. You can be well in yourself, but somebody super paranoid comes towards you. We all know this. It affects you. It affects you. We are affected by others. Fear is a vibration. It's an energy like anything else. So yes, we have to deal with it here, but we also have to deal with it in the world, if you like, and know at that point how to not resist being contaminated by it or infected by it, but how to not be the victim of it, how to maintain your presence, your centeredness. Again, we're talking martial arts.
An advice I would give, that you would give in a child, in an adult, in an aging person, in a dying person.
Oh la la.
In a few words. It might be the same.
Oh la la. Which implies a lot of things. So a child waking up. In a way, a child is already awake. This is a beautiful thing. The baby begins to wake up to the world. Is enchanted by the world. So our job is to nurture that in education, but most education is to close that down. Close that down. Because you're training the child to be a factory worker, really. So waking up, if you can help a child to stay awake, stay enchanted, stay curious, then to a young man or young woman, growing up, again, the tendency is to close down, to close half the world down. And these days, they're helped with the technology. They're checking. Am I here? Am I? Have I got a like? No. How many likes do I have? That's closing down. Okay? Open up. Open up. How open up? Well, a lot of young people are doing this. They're opening up. They say, oh, look at the world. Open up. Do something. You have the energy. You have the fire. Go and do something. Go and volunteer. Volunteer in Greece. You don't have to go to Africa. But if you need to go to Africa, don't go there and just sit on the beach and look at and check your Instagram. Go and work. Go and do something. Keep opening. Keep learning. And then middle age is the worst because you think you know it all. You learned it all. So you're in middle age. You are. Yeah, I know this. I know that. No, stay not knowing. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up from your ideology, what you think, you've got, your philosophy. Keep awake. Wake up. And then old age is when you've had your responsibilities, things like that. You've done your things with your family. It's when you can really wake, and you can recover that enchantment of a child again. You have the time, like a child did. The child didn't have responsibility. He was looked after, Generally, when you're old, you have to look after yourself and things like that. But, you have time now. You don't have that responsibility. So wake up again. Look at that mountain. Take time. Delight in that mountain. Delight in people. Delight in your children and grandchildren, and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't thinking of an answer because I wasn't ready for your question. But I would say, yeah, wake up. Keep awake. That's the whole point. Stay awake. This is extraordinary to be alive. It's extraordinary, But no, people live as though they presume they'd be alive, and so they sleepwalk through life until they get ill or get sick in old age or even in young age. What happened? Panic. Have to be what it is. That's the saddest thing in my work. When you're accompanying somebody, like I said, I'm really sad. I'm not sad that I'm dying. I'm sad I haven't lived. Which really means I'm sad I've slept through all these years, Sad. So, yeah, wake up. Thank you. Whoa, difficult question.